When Andrew quietly settled with Virginia Giuffre for a reported £12 million, questions exploded. How does a man with no official income afford such a figure? That amount didn't just materialize from his pension or property portfolio. The photos, the timing, the amount, and the urgency all suggest serious behind-the-scenes intervention, and fingers quickly pointed to the late Queen's personal finances. While no official confirmation exists, the assumption that royal funds were funneled into a private settlement adds another layer of secrecy to Andrew's already murky financial reality. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. This legal payment wasn't just a PR disaster, it was a financial rupture that exposed how fragile Andrew's resources really are. Analysts suggest that beyond his publicly estimated net worth, most of which is tied up in property, he lacks the liquid assets to cover ongoing legal risks or lifestyle costs. Buckingham Palace's quiet move to downsize Andrew's living arrangements appears less symbolic and more survivalist, a necessary step to contain financial exposure while keeping the monarchy's internal dealings away from further scrutiny. Prince Andrew's finances have always been a bit of a royal riddle. Lavish lifestyle on paper-thin income, multi-million-pound properties with no clear funding trail, and a luxury standard of living that just doesn't line up with his so-called retirement from royal duties. And now, as the spotlight turns back on him yet again, one question refuses to go away. Who's really bankrolling Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor? Let's cut straight to it. Officially, Prince Andrew brings in around £20,000 per year. That's his pension from his time in the Royal Navy. That's it. No more public funding, no royal salary, no formal income streams, at least none that have ever been disclosed. And yet, he's been living in Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion nestled within Windsor Great Park. The property, which is occupied since 2004, isn't some modest retirement home. It's a full-blown estate with massive upkeep costs. Landscaping, staff, maintenance, round-the-clock security. We're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds per year just to keep the place running. On a £20,000 pension, this isn't just a gap, it's a financial canyon. And unless he's winning the lottery every year, the numbers don't add up. The conclusion is unavoidable. Someone else is footing the bill. Or at least, supplementing it heavily. Photos. The Royal Lodge setup already raised eyebrows, but then came the real estate deal that tipped everything into full-blown suspicion mode. The 2007 sale of Sunning Hill Park. That property was a gift from the Queen after Andrew's wedding to Sarah Ferguson. It sat vacant and increasingly derelict until it was suddenly sold for £15 million, £3 million over the asking price. The buyer? A Kazakh billionaire with connections to UK business interests. The house itself? Never lived in. Eventually left to rot and later demolished. That sale wasn't just odd. It screamed red flag. Who overpays for a vacant royal eyesore, then lets it crumble to the ground? Many viewed it as less of a home purchase and more of a discreet financial favor. A loophole wrapped in a property deal. And who benefited? Andrew. Then there's the chalet in Switzerland. The infamous Verbier Lodge. Purchased by Andrew and Sarah Ferguson in 2014 for a staggering £18 million. It's hard to overstate how baffling this transaction was. Two people with no visible major income sources suddenly buying a luxury ski chalet with cash? No mortgage, no financing trail. And again, no answers. Later, they were sued for failing to repay a £6.6 million debt related to the chalet, and by 2022, the property was sold, allegedly to cover that very debt and help finance Andrew's legal settlement. Which brings us to the biggest financial blow of all, the settlement with Virginia Giuffre. Following a high-profile civil lawsuit in the United States and his now notorious BBC interview, Andrew opted to settle out of court. Reports place the settlement cost around £12 million. The figure alone would be crushing for anyone without deep financial reserves. And all signs point to the fact that Andrew did not have that kind of money readily available. Enter Queen Elizabeth. It's been widely reported that the late Queen stepped in to help cover the cost of the settlement. Quietly, without formal announcement. It's believed she used her private funds, specifically from the Duchy of Lancaster, her personal estate, to assist Andrew in closing the deal and preventing a trial that could have caused massive reputational damage to monarchy. But now the Queen is gone, and King Charles is calling the shots. And Charles? is not nearly as forgiving. From the moment he took the throne, Charles made it clear that he's pursuing a leaner, more cost-effective monarchy that includes reassessing the finances of extended royals, especially those who are no longer performing public duties. And Andrew, following his exile from royal life, fits that bill perfectly. This is where things get interesting. Behind closed doors, there's reportedly growing tension over Andrew's refusal to leave Royal Lodge. While the lease agreement gives him a right to stay, potentially until 2078, those rights come with a condition. He has to maintain the property himself, which, again, costs a fortune. And now that his mother is no longer quietly propping him up, that responsibility falls squarely on his shoulders. Or it should. The palace, meanwhile, is pushing him toward downsizing, specifically to a smaller property on the Sandringham estate. The idea is simple: lower costs, less attention, and a chance to discreetly contain a man whose mere presence continues to generate controversy. But Andrew isn't budging. He reportedly sees Royal Lodge as his home, his last stronghold of status, and is not giving it up without a fight. So, we've got a royal standoff, a disgraced duke clinging to a mansion he can't afford, and a new king trying to shut down a financial mess he didn't create. And all of it playing out behind the veil of royal discretion. Meanwhile, Andrew's actual net worth isn't particularly reassuring. Estimates put it around £3.7 million, but most of that is tied up in assets, not liquid cash. Homes, furnishings, perhaps a few investments. But nothing close to what's needed to cover multi-million-pound settlements, private security, estate maintenance, and legal fallout. Which brings us back to the question everyone keeps asking: how is he still afloat? Theories are everywhere. Some suggest it's drawing from secret family trusts. Others speculate about private investments, international benefactors, or hush-hush support from old allies. But nothing is confirmed. And that's the core issue: secrecy. The royal family has always played their finances close to the chest. But in Andrew's case, the opacity only feeds the suspicion. If there were legitimate, traceable sources of income, surely someone would have pointed to them by now. Instead, the silence has become deafening. And that silence is damaging. It's damaging not just to Andrew, but to the entire institution. Because when the public sees a man with no visible income living like a billionaire, and no one explains how, it looks like corruption. It looks like privilege unchecked. And it erodes a fragile trust the monarchy is trying to preserve. This is why the move to a smaller residence matters. It's not just about cutting costs. It's about controlling the optics, reducing the footprint, minimizing the exposure. The less grand Andrew's lifestyle appears, the less the palace has to answer for. It's a quiet, strategic retreat. But it also sends a message. The days of unlimited royal indulgence are over. And yet, none of this actually solves the central problem. If Andrew is no longer receiving financial support from the crown, and if he's not owning independently, the question remains: who is funding him? Until that question is answered, speculation will continue to swirl. And every new lawsuit, every property deal, every refusal to downsize will only drag the royal family back into the chaos they've been trying to escape. At a time when the monarchy is trying to streamline, modernize, and appear more transparent, Andrew remains a stubborn outlier. His finances are a case study in how wealth, privilege, and silence can intersect to create a public relations nightmare. The more you look, the more confusing it gets, and the more it drags down the institution trying to keep him at arm's length. Andrew's financial situation is no longer just his problem, it's the monarchy's. And until someone steps forward with real answers, the damage will keep spreading. What do you think? Is the palace hiding the full truth about Andrew's finances? Should there be more transparency about how royals fund their private lives once they step away from public duties? Leave a comment with your thoughts. Like if you're following the money, and subscribe if you want more no-spin breakdowns of the biggest royal and celebrity disasters making headlines. Because when it comes to Prince Andrew's fortune, the numbers may be silent, but the story is screaming. What's most striking about Prince Andrew's financial saga isn't just a mystery. It's a fact that after years of headlines, lawsuits, and quiet royal maneuvering, we still don't know anything concrete. Not really. And in a world where even billionaires post their income statements on Instagram and celebrities monetize every inch of their lives, Prince Andrew remains oddly frozen in another era. An era where you didn't have to explain how you got your money, especially if you had a title and the palace curtains firmly closed. But those curtains are slowly being pulled back. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Andrew doesn't generate income. He doesn't work. He doesn't hold board seats. He doesn't speak on panels or write books or give paid interviews. Every traditional avenue someone might use to stay financially afloat after losing their position is opted out or being shut out of all of them. So the illusion of wealth is managed to maintain for this long isn't self-funded. It's supported. And that's what really stings. Because when the public watches a royal, especially one no longer in good standing, continue to live in sprawling estates, show up in designer suits, and travel privately, the first thought is who's paying for that? And the second thought is why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Let's be honest, there's a reason King Charles is trying to move Andrew to a smaller home. It's not just about budget cuts. It's about optics. The palace knows the numbers don't look right. And if Andrew won't leave voluntarily, they'll apply pressure in the only ways they can, slowly limit his access, reduce his security detail, and turn the public spotlight into heat. What's even more telling is how the rest of the royal family has distanced themselves. You don't see public shows of support. You don't see Andrew at high-profile events. His appearances are rare, and when they do happen, the reactions are overwhelmingly negative. The public outcry hasn't faded, and neither has the discomfort inside the palace walls. But here's where it gets darker. If Andrew is still receiving private financial support from within the royal family, or even from sympathetic allies abroad, those channels are intentionally hidden. And that kind of secrecy doesn't just raise eyebrows anymore. It raises alarms. We're talking about a man who sold a house to a Kazakh billionaire for millions above market value. A man who bought an £18 million Swiss chalet with no public source of wealth. A man who needed help covering a £12 million legal settlement. And not once has he sat down to explain where any of the money came from. Instead, the narrative has been tightly controlled. Every statement carefully worded. Every move orchestrated. But the cracks keep showing. Even within the institution, there seems to be disagreement about how to handle him. Some insiders have reportedly pushed a complete financial separation, cut him off entirely, force a lifestyle change, make him sell assets. Others argue that such a move would only escalate the public feud and risk damaging the monarchy further. So the result? A half-measure approach. Quiet pressure. Financial restrictions behind the scenes. Strategic PR. But what that creates is a vacuum. No answers, just theories. No statements, just leaks. And in that vacuum, every detail becomes part of the conspiracy. Every car is seen driving, every property report, every vague comment from a friend of the Duke becomes fuel for speculation. Did Charles cut him off? Did a foreign donor step in? Is there still money left in the secret trust? The lack of transparency makes everything worse. It also undermines the message Charles is trying to send, that this is a new era for the monarchy, one of restraint, accountability, and modern values. But that message doesn't land when Andrew is still clinging to Royal Lodge and fighting tooth and nail to keep up the illusion of stability. And let's be real, Royal Lodge has become symbolic. It's not just about square footage. It's about status. Staying there means maintaining an aura of relevance, of being someone. And for Andrew, that may be the last thing he feels like he has left. So even though he doesn't own the property, and even though he's struggling to afford the upkeep, he's reportedly determined to stay. Lease or no lease, his position is becoming increasingly untenable, because the palace doesn't want to subsidize it. Charles doesn't want to explain it, and the public doesn't want to hear excuses anymore. And yet, here we are, still asking the same question. Where is Andrew getting his money? Some believe discreet family trust funds are quietly funding his life. Others think a few well-placed foreign friends have helped out through private arrangements. There's speculation that investments, quietly made during his more prominent years, may be providing returns. But none of it is confirmed. None of it is transparent. And none of it inspires confidence. That's the thing. This isn't just a personal scandal. It's institutional. Because every time Andrew's financial situation hits the headlines, it chips away at the idea that the monarchy is adapting to modern standards. that it's being responsible with money, that it's accountable to the public it still, in some ways, represents. And it's not just about taxpayers anymore. It's about legitimacy. Because when someone like Andrew can live this way, while refusing to explain how, it signals that accountability isn't expected, let alone enforced. And that goes against every effort the palace has made in the past few years to present a cleaner, more efficient monarchy. Meanwhile, the longer this goes unresolved, the more fragile Andrew's situation becomes. Legal costs, property maintenance, dwindling liquidity, his lifestyle is stretched thin. He may still have assets, but those assets are expensive to hold, and the palace is increasingly unwilling to carry the burden. So what happens next? More asset sales? A reluctant move to Sandringham? A carefully worded statement from Buckingham Palace that tries to reframe everything as responsible downsizing? Probably, but none of that will erase the last few years. None of that will answer the questions. And that's a real problem for Andrew. His silence has become his legacy. While other royals are being rebranded or strategically retired, Andrew remains the one figure who can't be rehabilitated. Not because of one mistake, but because he never gave the public a reason to trust him again. No ownership, no transparency, just silence, privilege, and a lifestyle that keeps spinning despite the broken engine beneath it. At this point, even the best PR in the world couldn't clean this up. Not without answers, not without real transparency, and not without a full reset, which, let's be honest, Andrew's not likely to volunteer for. So, the palace continues to manage the situation, trying to avoid headlines, hoping the public turns its attention elsewhere. But with every new revelation, every leak report, every real estate rumor, Andrew's financial mystery drags the monarchy back into the spotlight they're so desperately trying to escape. And the question remains unanswered. Who is paying for Prince Andrew's life? And why won't anyone tell the truth? At this point, the silence isn't just awkward, it's loud. Every day that goes by without an official explanation only reinforces what people already suspect. That Prince Andrew's finances are being propped up behind the scenes by invisible hands, and no one in the royal family wants to say who's doing the lifting. And can you blame them? From a PR standpoint, it's a disaster. On one side, you have a public that's already skeptical of monarchy spending. On the other, a royal who's essentially persona non grata, but somehow still living like he's part of the main cast. If they admit someone's been secretly bankrolling him, it confirms what critics have said all along. The rules don't apply to Andrew. And if they deny it, well, then we're right back to the same problem. How is he affording this? Let's talk security. For example, after he stepped back from public duties, Andrew reportedly lost his taxpayer-funded police protection. That's a major cost. For someone like him, even private security can easily run into the hundreds of thousands per year. And yet, there's been no indication he's lowered his standards, or that he's suddenly become the type to take public transport and cross his fingers. So who's covering that? Is he quietly using funds from the Queen's estate? Is there a private agreement with King Charles to keep certain protections in place unofficially? No one's saying. And that's exactly why the questions keep coming. The public isn't demanding a spreadsheet. But when someone embroiled in one of the most explosive royal scandals in recent history still gets to live on a multi-million-pound estate, enjoy elite-level security, and maintain appearances, the palace can't just shrug and pretend it's all above board. And then there's the real estate angle, the one that won't go away. The Royal Lodge situation has dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Andrew's refusal to leave has reportedly become a source of deep frustration inside the palace. Not just because it contradicts a monarchy's image overhaul, but because it draws attention right back to the very thing they're trying to phase out, unchecked royal entitlement. The official line has been that Andrew signed a long-term lease and that, technically, he has a right to stay. But let's be honest, technically isn't cutting it anymore. His residency is a symbol of everything the crown is trying to distance itself from. It's not just a home. It's a headline waiting to happen. And as pressure builds to get him out, the optics get worse. The more the palace tries to quietly nudge him out of Royal Lodge and into a smaller, less luxurious home on the Sandringham estate, the more obvious it becomes that something behind the scenes isn't working. Because if Andrew truly doesn't have the money to maintain the property, and all signs suggest he doesn't, then his continued presence there raises serious concerns about how deep this unofficial financial support really goes. If he moves, it will likely be framed as a private family decision or a necessary financial adjustment. But make no mistake, it will be a forced retreat, a quiet exile within the system. Not a choice, but an ultimatum. And that only brings more attention to the elephant in the room. If they had to push him out of one estate, what does that say about how he's been affording it all this time? Because let's not forget, Andrew isn't just struggling to downsize. He's also juggling the long-term fallout of a massive legal settlement. That £12 million wasn't just a blip on the financial radar. It was a devastating hit. And even with reported help from the late Queen, it's unlikely he walked away from that deal unscathed. Which leads us right back to the same conclusion. Andrew's financial position is unstable. Whatever wealth he has left is tied up in properties, and liquid assets are reportedly scarce. His income is essentially non-existent. His royal privileges have been scaled back, and the support systems that once protected him are being dismantled, one awkward, overdue step at a time. He's not broke, but is teetering, living on borrowed time, borrowed goodwill, and, very likely, borrowed money. And the longer this charade continues, the more damaging it becomes. Not just for him, but for the monarchy. Because if the royal family can't, or won't, explain how Andrew has maintained a multimillionaire lifestyle while having no formal income for years, what does that say about the institution's credibility? About its priorities? About its ability to change? In a world where public figures are expected to own their choices, show their receipts, and answer for their mistakes, Andrew is doing none of the above, and the royal family is letting him, which is why this story still matters. It's not just about finances. It's about accountability, transparency, whether the monarchy can live up to the standards it claims to represent in the modern era. Because until someone finally answers a question, who's bankrolling Andrew, the silence will keep doing the talking. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you're side-eyeing this entire situation, and subscribe if you want more untangled messes from the world of royals and rich people who live like rules are optional. Because this story, it's far from wrapped up.